Quantum growth is about generating revenue. It's not about cost control. You can always hire somebody. When you're starting a new business, it's about revenue. Creating revenue. It's just like success. You can't have too much success. You can't have too much revenue. When I was younger, I used to say you can't have too much something else, but I know better than that now. It's revenue. Caught that a little slow, huh? Next. Now this was advice that he gave me. His definition on friends are friendship in trouble, courage in battle, and this is important, wisdom and rage. I've got a lot more wisdom now than I did 10 or 15 years ago. And I would suggest when you're measuring friendship in business that you think of those three things, because they're crucially important, and they could save you a tremendous amount of heartache. I think we're going to break for lunch now. When we come back, we're not going to talk, put the next flip chart up. What we're not going to talk about is theory X, theory Y, theory Z, which isn't down there. For those of you that have gone to the B schools or studied that stuff, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and if you put pink lights and soft music, the employees will be more productive. We're not talking about that crap. We're talking about what it takes to run a business. And I think that you'll enjoy it a great deal, because we're going to talk about how to run your businesses, whether you're a successful stockbroker. Is it stockbroker-S or broker? Oh, I'm sorry, financial consultant. Okay, well, I've been away. Okay, I've been away 20 years. Okay. Or whether you're a financial consultant, S, or you're a doctor, or whether you're in the construction business, or whether you're a student getting ready to go out in the real world, or if you want to build a practice or build a new business, and because there's some very crucial things that have to happen. And even though what they teach in the B schools about theory X and theory Y and theory Z is all true, we now see that some of those systems don't work forever like you're taught in school. We now see that the Japanese system has flaws. And Deming, who is given credit for quality management and total quality management and those kinds of things, in Japan they're having challenges now. And the IBM, old Big Blue, is laying off people, and nobody ran an organization more in the B school mode than IBM. And a lot of the things that we held and revered for years and years and years don't work forever. And businesses do have times where they mature and they stop. So we're going to relate that back to your own businesses, to your own lives. We'll have a lot of fun. We're going to get some interplay. I'm going to ask you about your own personal challenges. As we left off before we broke for lunch, and for those of you that have done business with me, you realize that I am not a theory X, theory Y, theory Z manager, and that soft lights and music and not beating your employees and the things that have come out of the Industrial Revolution are all great, and that's nice, but that's not what we're going to talk about here. I'm going to take it from a more pragmatic point of view, a point of view that I actually lived through for the better part of 10 years. Now, most of what you learned doesn't teach you how to start a company from scratch and grow it to a large size. What you normally have taught, with few exceptions, the gentleman that founded Federal Express with his thesis for his MBA at Harvard. And then he took it, and that's how Federal Express came about. But there's maybe 4 or 5 of those cases, and there's been, 3 million people come out of the B schools, or 10 million people come out of the B schools, or however many millions. So it's more infinitesimal amount of people that have taken what they've learned in education at the higher levels and made it into something from scratch. So what we're going to talk about is what I call the life cycle of business, from entrepreneur to manager to versus leader. Now, I call it leader, but the B school and professional managers call it professional management. But if you'll just interchange, for the purposes of this conversation, leader with professional manager. Now, most of us that have started a business or building a practice, medical practice or a law practice or whatever, start here at ground zero. We have an idea, we have a revelation, we have a product, we have a concept that we're going to start with. Almost all businesses, by definition, start growing geometrically, because when you're coming from zero, it's not that difficult to come with geometric or exponential growth. Where it becomes very difficult is at these phases. When you go from an entrepreneur, and as we've already talked about, I started with a lease fax machine, a phone, myself, in the spare bedroom of my house in Palos Verdes. And the first year I was in business, I did $50 million in revenue. So obviously my growth was like this. But as you gain employees, or as it becomes necessary to have employees, you go from what's called what I call an entrepreneur to a manager. How effective you are as a manager will depend on how effective you are in maintaining your growth. Now, most people that are in business for themselves never get beyond the entrepreneur phase. Most. Some people that are in business for themselves get to the manager phase. Even less that are in business for themselves get to what I call the crossroads, where you either stay an entrepreneur thinking person, you stay a managerial thinking person, or you accept and create a leadership position for yourself. Now, earlier this morning, I gave you the example of Eisenhower and Montgomery and pulling the string versus pulling the string and leading from the front. Now, most of you that are here today will get to this position of the crossroads, and most of you, except for the fact that you've attended this seminar now, would have stayed in the managerial role and will have never taken it to the professional manager or leadership role. Now, we've heard examples from Casey earlier, and we've talked about Burl and her successes, and I'm going to ask them to elaborate on them in a little bit. But it's a very important concept, and we all know businesses that stay in this mode. Now, how do we become a leader? Well, let me back up a second. We've already said that we become a manager after just being a straight entrepreneur because out of necessity. We hire people, and we've got to have somebody working for us. And so we learn to be a manager normally by default. And normally the mistakes that we make are the normal mistakes. We either give people the responsibility without the authority. We very seldom ever give anybody authority without the responsibility. We don't make people accountable, etc., etc. Now, so if we become a manager by default, then how do we become a leader or a professional manager? Now, some people become professional managers because they've come up in big corporations. They've come up Gulf Oil, IBM, Xerox, or whatever. But the entrepreneur that starts a business normally doesn't have the luxury of that professional training. The entrepreneur that starts a business normally has to learn things the hard way. And we've already said one of the rules for success is to double your failure rate, as Mr. Watson said when he founded IBM. Well, at this juncture, doubling your failure rate may put you out of business. And, doubling your failure rate has put a lot of businesses out of business. Now, Auntie? These are very simplistic, but these are the normal methods by which companies are managed, small and medium-sized companies. Again, I used to ask these questions, and I engage in a little intellectual discourse about how one entrepreneur would tell me how come this method was so successful, having everybody report to him. I'm not going to do that anymore because I know that doesn't work. But normally, entrepreneurs run their business where they have everyone reporting to themselves because they're used to making the decisions. That's natural. Didn't say it's right, just said it's natural. Or you can use one of the other methods, and obviously this is a 2-tiered, 4 reporting to a CEO type or 3 reporting to a CEO type. Modern management dictates, or the B schools tell you that you can really functionally only manage 2 to 4 people. I've been successful and unsuccessful at managing 2 and 4. And it depends on who the 2 are or who the 4 are. It's not so much who you are. But less control, not more control, and I don't mean vis-a-vis financial controls, I mean individual controls is how you create quantum growth. Bless you. Geometric growth. Most entrepreneurs squeeze their businesses to death. They have to be involved in every bit of the decision-making process. They don't allow their underlings, their colleagues, their subordinates the opportunity to grow as managers. And the only way that managers grow is by making mistakes, giving them the responsibility and the authority to move forward. Where we are, and what is a concept that is normally extremely difficult to swallow, if you will, for somebody that started a business, is the less control versus more control. One of the reasons that Great Western Resources was such a success for many years, and one of the reasons that it grew so rapidly for many years, was the fact that it had less control, not more control from the top. And again, I'm not talking about financial controls. That's something else. Now, see, my theory has always been a CEO is to a company as a rider is to a bucking bronco. I always believed that you should have aggressive, smart people around you that want your job. Not everybody agrees with that. And some people say that if I had had a different scenario, I'd still be sitting at the head of Great Western Resources. That may or may not be true. But if you want quantum growth, exponential growth that we've discussed and what the seminar is all about, you want to find the smartest people, aggressive people that want your job to work with you. That want your job. And unfortunately, that may mean that one day you're going to walk out of the office and you're going to have knives in your back. But that's how you get quantum growth. Now, I borrowed another saying from Napoleon Hill. Most great leaders began in the capacity of followers. They became great leaders because they were intelligent followers, and that's true. I wasn't a follower too long, but when I was one, I was a very good one. And that's why my first career was a career Army officer, which, if you're not a good follower, you can't contemplate a career in the military, especially a career as a junior officer like I was. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do now, for this example, I gave an example earlier that we all had 100 IQ, and some of us I was giving you a little, and some of you I was taking a little, okay? We've already determined that it's not possible to have somebody 10 times smarter than us with 1,000 IQ. And we've already gone through the exercise, and then why in the hell are people 1,000 times richer than us? Assuming they didn't inherit the money. I mean, they made it. We've already gone through that exercise. Okay? We've also gone through the exercise about marginal shift in effort to get a quantum increase in output, i.e. the batter who hits 250 and the guy who hits 350. That's only one more base hit per 10, and yet one guy gets 4 or 5 million, one guy gets 300,000. Okay. We've been through that. Now, what you don't want to be is, I could have been a contender. For those of you that saw the movie with Marlon Brando, On the Waterfront, I think it was called, that's not what this seminar is about. This seminar is about to give yourself the break that you need. And in one of the Peñaisms, even when one thoughtfully and judiciously plans, more often than not, such plans are overcome by external events. Therefore, you can never underestimate how wrong you can be. You can never underestimate. Now, I'm going to ask Casey right now, who's in the middle of a transaction that I have some knowledge of. And just briefly, I would like him to go through. Now, I think he follows the guidelines in this book, with the book I wrote, better than I do. And that's how the things that I exemplified in the transactions that I talk about, how screwed up things can get, and how he has walked himself through very well in a transaction that was really doomed from the beginning. So they told him. This was a deal that could never happen. So they told him. And especially not by a no-good SOB like him. For sure, so they told him. Is that all correct? Okay, I'd like you to walk us through it. Tell us the business you're in, where you are, and how it got started.
I believe it was the middle of May I discovered that they had gone around my back and were trying to take the company on their own. May 22nd, I went to Dan's seminar in Los Angeles, and I thought maybe there is a way. At that point, I was completely out of the deal. There was no getting it, there was no chance, there was no anything. They had the money, I didn't. They had the clout, I don't. Everything said that no, there's no way you can do it. The first thing I had to do was be ready to pay the price to action. I was scheduled to get married in October. I postponed that. I was supposed to have some plastic surgery on my chin. I postponed that. I'm not going to be able to talk for 2 weeks whenever I have that done. I missed my last 2 dentist appointments. I used to go to the gym 5 days a week. Now I'm lucky if I make it once or twice.
All sounds good to me.
But it's fact. Then as I finally get the principal back to the bargaining table, we make an agreement. A still unknown to me assassin comes at me from another angle in the jewelry industry and tells this guy that I'm not credible. I have 2 bankruptcies on file. I can't do the deal. I can't afford it. All of which is untrue. In the meantime, while I'm doing what I need to do to vindicate my reputation with this guy, I do find out who it is that he really wants to sell the business to. And I don't even know who this person is. I find him in Northern California. I search him out. I have everybody in the world looking for him. And I found him. I said, let's get this deal back. Make a long story short, he and I are in the deal together at this point. On a joint venture, I gave up 50% of the entire thing. On the retirement sale or liquidation sale, which should put between $100,000 and $200,000 in his pocket, and he's happy as hell. And then I'll still wind up with the company. Contract should be signed Tuesday or Wednesday.
Now, when things started to fall apart, and you were driving to your meeting and pounding the steering wheel, and relating it to, I forget which one of the models you use, Model 1 or Model 2, but the same things that fell in the toilet in the book it was like deja vu. He was experiencing them because there's only so many things that can go wrong in deals. And $1 million deals are very similar to $5 and $20 million deals. Why don't you walk me through that?
I'm sorry, Dan.
Okay. When the deal was first disintegrating and you were on your way to the meeting and you were pounding the steering wheel and you were going to have to go in and talk to this guy and you were trying to relate it to what was in the book.
I don't recall what part of the book it was and what part of my notes it was. but that's
Doesn't matter.
That's what saved my butt.
Yeah.
At that time, it was reading the manual and the notes I had taken at the May 22nd meeting. The whole thing had already gone down the toilet. I mean, it was flushed. I had my hand down there trying to yank it back up, and I when I pulled up to the office, I was, and this Dan knows this guy. I told him I was pounding on the steering wheel. I was shaking all over, trying to figure out how I was going to yank this thing back, and it's just been from. And I can't recall exactly what part it was at that time because I've used so many of the tools that you've given me throughout this whole transaction. I really don't recall right now what transpired at that point. But I did get it back. And I never, ever, ever, ever quit.
It's, thank you very much, Casey. As I pointed out at the beginning of this, my methods aren't glamorous. My methods aren't for everybody. That's for God knows that. They work. And more than anything, it transcends being persevering. It transcends having tenacity. It transcends all those things. What it's about, and what we've talked about, and what we've tried to focus on, are the things I've done right in my business career. I obviously did not write the things I've done wrong in my business career in the manual. That manual would be larger by a significant portion than this manual. This manual's got 118 pages. That would have thousands. I don't know for sure how many pages. And as other people have said, success leaves clues. And what Casey has done is he's taken like a Bible and he's worked this thing, and what it was acquisition number 2.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, it was acquisition number 2, and it was my Bow Valley acquisition, and how when Bow Valley walked away from the table, and and one of our senior managers let him walk away from the table, and that's what's in the book, and exactly on a smaller scale is exactly what happened to him, and how I went back and I threatened Bow Valley. I was going to sue all the directors, and I brought in a third party who was friends of Bow Valley. I mean, it's the same thing, different cities, different year, different kind of transaction, not even in the jewelry industry. But those are the kinds of things that you have to be willing to do. And as I said earlier, to suck up your pantyhose. I mean, it's very simple. And not everybody's willing to do that. And what he was talking about, a pay price to action, we're going to get to that in a minute. But it's gratifying to me when, and he's not the only, he happens to be here today, but he's not the only one in a very short period of time that has been successful. And I talked about some of the other people, Bruce Whipple, and some of the other people that have used the techniques. And the thing I keep saying, and because I'm not that special, I'm just not. It's easy. It really is. If it were really hard, or if it really took 180 IQ, I wouldn't be up here. I mean, it doesn't take that. What it takes is, one, that you're going to be comfortable with it. I told Casey that 1867, or whenever it was founded, in which I'm trying to think of a way to squeeze in on this deal so I can use the date myself. As I said earlier, John Allen, this thing with Russia, 1867, I mean, there's a lot of possibilities here. I mean, I like that founded or since 18, that looks good on stationery. The Russians will feel better about it, or whatever, okay. But I mean, it can happen, and that's why I stay in touch with the attendees, unlike some of the other guys that are too busy to return phone calls, and I hope that never changes. Auntie? Because even though he experienced some failures, as Napoleon Hill again said, every failure brings with it a seed of an equivalent advantage. Progress often masquerades as trouble. I've had a lot of masquerades in my time. Progress often masquerades as trouble. But it is progress. and any of the things that you've accomplished in your life that are meaningful. I've talked to Judy about going to medical school, becoming a psychiatrist. I don't know if late in life is the right terminology, but not as young as you might have been when you did it. And she had a lot of things to overcome, a lot of obstacles. John Allen Chalk, going to law school after being a TV evangelist. Did you used to press their head down and they'd fall down on the ground?
No, not quite.
Come on, John Allen. I mean, TV evangelist to lawyer to operating officer of one of the largest independent oil companies in Texas. And I mean, and he's practicing law again. But I mean, and he went to law school kind of later in life, I'd say.
35.
Yeah. And so, but I mean, it's, other people have done it in other things. And it just depended how bad Judy wanted to be a psychiatrist, and how bad does Casey really want to be since 1867. And how bad, I mean, and it's how bad, how bad did you want to go out with that guy or that girl that you coincidentally showed up in front of their classes and drove by their house hoping that they'd come out and you could say, I mean, those things we did as a kid, and because I see people smiling, we've all done that. How bad? How bad is Dan Jr. and Derek ask me, when do we get to drive the cars? They have little miniature Ferraris at the castle. I mean, if they asked me once, they asked me 1,000 times until they finally broke me down. They finally broke me down. It was like the Chinese water. I mean, one after another. And now the last one to break me down is my daughter Kelly, who's only 6, who can't reach the pedals, was driving Derek's little miniature Ferrari that goes 30 miles an hour. And they have 2 forward gears and 1 reverse gear. And when she was trying to explain to me how she could drive, and I said, honey, but you know how to drive this way? She says, yeah. The only problem is, Daddy, my feet don't touch the pedals. She didn't understand that was part of the driving, and that would cue me in on not letting her do it. Because she convinced me, you push the lever this way to get in first gear and then far. But then when I said, well, honey, your feet, and then she reversed field immediately. Oh, my feet only don't touch the pedals when I wear these shoes. When I wear the other shoes, then they touch the pedals. Yeah, well, we gerrymandered something up and we put a cushion thing behind her so she could be closer to the steering wheel. And I saw her, when I was getting ready the day before I left the castle, she was driving across the front lawns. So, but I mean, it's how bad did they want to drive those cars? More than life itself. So they kept after it. Casey's going to keep after it until he gets that done. And that's what we're talking about. And that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to instill, and I know that I will by the end of this evening. Now, when you're starting your business, if you have a failure plan, I guarantee you'll fail. You have to plan for success. No backup plans, no ripcords, no fail-safes, or you will fail. Absolute. When we were starting Great Western at the very beginning, and we were going after these acquisitions, and we were trying to raise money, and when I sent Charlie Soliday to Citibank for the financing for Bow Valley, I said, don't come back unless you get the money. Now, the way he ultimately did it, and we called him CB after that, Charlie Big, is he wound up paying, I think, $250,000 to Citibank just to look at the deal. They didn't promise they were going to do the deal. That was only to look at the deal. Then he paid Solomon Brothers $500,000 to look at the deal, which they ultimately stiffed us on because they didn't do the deal. Citibank did do the deal. Now, $750,000 to our size company in December 1986 was a lot of money. That's an understatement. $750,000 was all the money we had in the world. Now that's more an accurate fact. But Charlie knew that if we didn't do the Bow Valley deal, because some of the other oil discoveries we thought we made weren't panning out, like most of the discoveries that are made, I might add, that don't pan out to the engineering numbers. I mean, he knew we needed that deal. It also sent us into the next league. I mean, we made a quantum leap. We went to a company, that had $250 million in assets from a company that had 60 or 40 or whatever we had at that time. But he, bless you, he paid the price, and And to hear him tell the story, he wrote the check like this, on his knees. That's how he wrote the check for Citibank to look at the deal. And they ultimately did do the deal, and we got it done. And I can't emphasize that enough. Because he had no backup plans. I said, don't come back. You will have left Coopers and Lybrand in that partnership retirement for nothing if this deal doesn't get done. Okay. Now, but you still have to remember, and I've learned this later in life, not early in life. The more you investigate, the less you have to invest. The more you look at a deal, the less deals you'll do. The more you will look at a deal, the less deals you'll do. There was a gentleman in the UK, and it was the second largest bridge building company in the world, and it was called McKay and Brown, or Brown and McKay. And we were trying to sell him a limited partnership in the UK. And I think John Allen, we were trying to peddle those doggy properties of yours, as I recall. And we're having dinner one night at the Hilton in London, and they had closed off the dining room area because Secretary of State Schultz was there, and as Linda said, with his niece. And Secret Service closed everything off, and McKay was in there, and we were discussing, and he said, well, I'll have to ask my partner, Mr. Johnson. He ultimately didn't do the deal with us, and a year or two later I bumped into him at a restaurant, and I asked him, well, how is your partner, Mr. Johnson? He said, well, Mr. Johnson died in 1941 over someplace. He was a RAF pilot. I said, wait a minute. You told me a year or two ago that you had a check. I said, well, that's just my British way of politely bowing out of a deal whenever I have to check with Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson's been dead for 45 years. Because he had investigated, and he didn't like our doggy properties. John Allen, see, it's our properties now. Okay? He didn't like it. And I would submit to you the deals that you're involved in, the transactions, the more you investigate, and we're going to go through a whole checklist and a whole little packet of things that we're going to give you to take away to help you investigate and help you ascertain whether transactions are good or bad. And I guarantee if you follow these things religiously, the chances of you getting ripped are much lessened. I mean, you can't get around. People will still commit fraud. People will still lie. People are still going to do that. But I mean, on most deals, you will allow yourself a much, much greater probability of success if you follow the benchmarks that we're going to use. Okay, Auntie. Now, how many in the room have had pride of authorship or have had a deal that you tried to get done that you were unsuccessful at? Okay. Now, pride of authorship, before we get to this, has killed more deals than, in my judgment, AIDS will kill by the year 2000. AIDS will kill in people. People get an idea, it's theirs. They're covetous of it. They're proud of it. They brag about it, which is all great. But when it comes to financing, well, I'll give you all the money, but I want 80% of the deal. Well, I can't do that. That's my baby. We've all seen it. They won't turn loose for what they need. They need capital. Almost everybody in this room needs capital for one thing or another. Nancy Ernest needs it to buy clothes, more clothes. Well, that was kind of a cheap shot, but it happens to be true, isn't it? Yeah. She's a buyer. She's a born buyer, you know. And my wife needs it to buy clothes, and Marcia needs more money under management, and et cetera, et cetera. Yet, what happens is deals used to get brought to us at Great Western that they want our money, but they don't want to give up any ownership. Or they wanted our money, yet they were willing to give up only a small part of the ownership. And when you're getting started, since I've already told you, the most important thing is the transaction. To have a transaction, to have a track record of deals, you're going to have to give up. If somebody, we've talked about this briefly, if somebody's going to put up all the money, I assure you, you're going to have to give up control. I don't care what the deal is. The best way to do it, as Brill did recently, is to put up no money and still do the deal. And if Brill would share with us, do we have a mic? I'd like her to explain how she just recently did this, where you're from, what industry you're in, and that kind of stuff.
I'm from Ottawa, Canada, Cars, which is a little village outside of Ottawa. I own a land development company, and my husband builds new houses. When I attended the seminar in May, I must have been told about 50 times, I guess, by Dan, that I was choking the business. And
100.
100? Okay. Many times. Which I was, because I tend to take over control. My husband is very quiet, very shy, very intelligent, doesn't talk much, but what he says makes sense. And I tend to talk all the time. But anyways, Dan picked up very quickly that I thought I was the boss, but not really. And I've kind of got out of Doug's business altogether and just been working on my own. Since then, last year we did $2.5 million of sales. We have almost surpassed that since May of this year, since attending this seminar. Not built yet, but in sales that are being built within the next few months. The deal that I did that Dan spoke of was there was a subdivision. It's a 76-lot subdivision that being a builder, you have to have land at all times to build on. We wanted this piece of property. I went in and talked to the owners. What I did then is we made them an offer with absolutely no money down. The market is not incredible in Canada right now for land, so there are some deals out there. I went in, I bought the 76 lots, it cost me not one penny. The deal is that when I sell a house on it, I pay for the lot. So I've got absolutely no carrying costs whatsoever for that land. Then I talked to the other people. There's 3 other partners, and what we're doing is they're going to pay for the model home. Now, in order to sell a subdivision of 76 houses, you have to build a model home. So we will be building the model at their cost. So we will have absolutely no money whatsoever in it, no risk. And we will be very successful because it's in an area that will sell. I also have done a couple other things that I didn't even get a chance to tell Dan that I'd like to share with you. And one is we're going after a 55-unit subsidized housing for the government, which is something we never did, that Dan suggested that we look into getting government contracts for housing. I have another very interesting deal, which was brought to me by this. I got a phone call actually from this old gentleman. He's about 72, who has 100 units.
For those of you that are close to that age, she didn't really mean old gentleman. She meant senior.
Oh, senior gentleman. Yeah. Sorry. He has a 100-unit subdivision, and his forte is in sand and gravel. It's not in development, so he really didn't know what to do. He called me and asked me if I could sell it for him. I took a look at it, looked at the numbers and the things that were available, and I said, I didn't think so. And he said, well, can you do anything with it? So what he's done is he's given me 50% of the deal. I'm putting absolutely no money in. I'm raising $400,000 from investors that will pay all the costs, giving them 30% of the deal. I'm keeping 20% for myself with no money, and the older gentleman, senior gentleman's getting 50%. So that's going to be a very good deal as well. And these are all by using Dan's strategies. And the biggest strategy, which I think that my husband and I have taken, is we have absolutely no limits. I mean, there are just absolutely nothing now that we can't do. Even if we don't have the money to do it, we're going in and pretending that we do, and it's working. And it's really incredible.
Thank you. And my shtick is that I'm not one of the no money down real estate guys that does these infomercials, but when we talked, it just seemed to me in the idea about the government subsidized business, it made sense. All of my ideas don't work. Believe me, I'd be Ross Perot if they all worked. But quite frankly, the last few years I was at Great Western, I wasn't, other than for big problem solving, I wasn't in the business of idea generating. I had become a professional manager. And since I left, it's been a lot more fun having to think on my feet and outwit my fellow entrepreneurs, bankers, or whatever. And because now I'm thinking more like I did when I started Great Western. as you gain success, and this is something I also learned the hard way, always maintain your personal relationships on the same plane upon which they were formed. True friends will rejoice in your professional success. Allow them to enjoy them with you. Allow them to enjoy them with you. Do not ever reassess their personal and professional lives in terms of your own. I know this from my own personal experience. My real friends and your real friends will revel in your success and be happy for you. Those that aren't your real friends will be looking forward for the first time you stumble, and we all stumble. And I've stumbled a bunch of times. I have a lot of scar tissue. I've basically, with a few exceptions, have got the same friends I've had for 20 or 30 years. Some of them dating back to when I was in grammar school. As Leanne will attest to, I talk to people that I've known since I'm 10 years old. And they're all happy for me, but that's important, and because I'm assuming you're all going to be more successful after today, and the people that you deal with, your true friends, will be happy for you, and the others, in my judgment, you don't need. Now, this is something I learned the hard way, and I didn't really do, but I know it should be done. When you get rid of somebody, never ever give them a hook to get back in. Always make a clean and definable break. This one I learned the hard way. I mean, there's a couple of people smiling in the audience that know exactly what, but since I'm going to be going to court here in a few days, I just assume I won't talk about it. But when it's time for somebody to go, it's time for them to go. It's like being almost divorced or almost pregnant. There ain't any. I mean, when it's time for them to go, that's it. They're gone. And too many times it's easier to do it the other way. It's more because it's out of your comfort zone for whatever reason, or because other people have convinced you that, well, you really need that person and you really don't. And it's a very important concept, and as your businesses grow, and as you have less control instead of more control, you'll have more people, and that's where it becomes even more important. When you make those breaks, even though I've never been divorced, I've only been married 3 times, I already told you the same person, it's if that were ever to happen, I'm sure now knowing what I know, I would make it a clean, definable break. Okay. Okay. Now, we've heard about some successes, and as I told you, we should revel in them. And now we're going to talk a little bit about doing, when I say your first deal, I don't mean your first deal. I mean the first deal after the seminar. And that first deal may be you decide that you're going to leave where you're working. That may be you decide that you're going to go off and start your own practice. That may be you're going to go do something completely different. As a matter of fact, we've had people, in fact, there was a doctor, Enrico, the doctor from Chicago, Nelson. He's from Watts, but he practices in Chicago or Ohio or... Well, anyway, we recently heard from him, and I told him he's an eloquent public speaker. He's a very gifted young doctor, and I mean really gifted speaker. And I told him that there's got to be a way that you can make more money than practicing medicine, especially what's happened with medicine, which Judy can tell you ad nauseum at the break. But I mean that the same monies that were involved when they started medical school in the year 1, and now that they're out, be it psychiatry, brain surgery, general practitioner, just aren't the same because of Medi-Cal, Medicaid, how the government is either going to subsidize or not subsidize the medical profession. So he, on top of it, being a gifted speaker, he's pretty damn disenchanted. And we sent him a fax and I had to apologize because I've been so focused on this that I told him I was going to get back to him, and that was in February, and I never did, and I apologized, and I told him that I was looking forward to seeing him when we go to Chicago. And and I'm thinking, and he had asked me to think about, well, what else could he do? I mean, he's got 10, 12 years of education, college, and he's a 33 or 35-year-old physician. And I don't know him, but we're going to sit down and talk about it. So that decision you might make for your first deal is you might do something completely different. Quantum thinking in geometric and exponential growth often comes with a reversal of direction, complete, total. Doing something completely different than you've been trained to do, something that you've done. When I left Wall Street, that February I was going to be made a partner at Bear Stearns. I left in November before. They said I was a psychopath. Well, a lot of people have called me a psychopath over the years. But they said, Dan, you are crazy. You're walking away from millions of dollars. Nobody walked away from the partnerships at Bear Stearns in those days. Okay. Now I used to be the second most famous guy to leave Bear Stearns because KKR guys were Bear Stearns guys. Kravis, Kroll, or whatever. Okay. And I left. They left a year before I did. And but I left, and I went into something completely different that I really didn't know anything about, which was the oil business. Some people in this room would tell you that I still don't know much about the oil business, which maybe I do or don't. It doesn't make any difference, really. I made a lot of money in the oil business, okay? Then when we did a complete reversal from what I didn't know much about the oil business, people thought, and to go into the coal business, which if you thought the oil business was a rough business, the coal business makes the oil business like Disneyland. I mean, it's really tough. So, I mean, complete reversals. And so you might now interject into your thought process, you know, that thing that you fantasized about 3 years ago, or that thing that you always wanted to do but never did. This may give you some food for thought that it may be time. It also may be time to pass on, to those of you that are in that position, pass on your business completely. It may be time, and I gave this advice to somebody once and he didn't do it and his company's bankrupt now, to take your progenies out of the business. I gave this advice in 1987, and the company no longer exists, and this was a company that was in business 60 or 70 years because he turned the business over to his two oldest sons that just didn't have the same metal. I mean, whereas they say that the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, well, this must have been a different tree, a different apple rolled down the hill, or I don't know what the hell happened, but they sure as hell weren't like their old man. I mean, and he came back out of retirement and he liquidated the company. That was his last task. So, I mean, just like we're talking about getting outside the box, I mean, think about things that you've never thought about. Microphone, please, for Becky.
Could you just do a little clarification, though, because earlier you had said that the biggest mistake people make a lot of times is in getting a little bored or thinking that what they're doing, even though it's successful, is mundane, and they just really don't think they want to do that anymore. But they should write it out because that's still where there's a lot of success and a lot of money for them. But yet, if the idea is, and I guess where it gets a little confusing is, we all think we want to do something different from time to time. It's the grass is always greener, and you didn't know anything about the oil business, you got into it and you made a whole lot of money. You didn't know anything about the movie business, you got into it and you lost a whole lot of money. So maybe this is a rhetorical question, but is there? How do you know when it's time to make the move? How do you know when it's time to leave what you've got? How do you know when it's time to take the shot at something you don't know? In hindsight, is there any way you would have known to stay out of the movie business, or anything that told you?
When I saw those big buxom women wearing not too much clothes and I found out for real that there is such a thing as a casting couch. And I mean, if I, you know, I thought that was all in the movies, but I mean, that's all for real. And being influenced by my partners, or one partner specifically that was in love with that business, or he was in love with the trappings, so to speak, of that business. I mean, I should have had my brains blown out. I mean, and I didn't, but I still did it. I still made 3 or 4 movies. I mean, I should have learned after the first time. But again and again.
But how did you know you would make it in the oil business, and why did you make it in the oil business and not in the movie business?
Well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, I lost all my money in the movie business with other people managing it. Okay, and I stayed managing the oil company, or in charge of ultimately the managers of the oil and gas and the coal company. And I didn't, you know, and I grew the oil company from nothing. So even though I'm not an oil man, I know a lot about the running of the business. A lot of things I still don't know. And my former chief financial officer, who's sitting in the audience, could get up here and talk ad nauseum about the things I don't know about the oil business. But I grew. That's the 10 doors. There he is, John Ernest. But I grew it from the beginning. What I did in the movie business, I tried to acquire a movie company, and so I know that isn't the way. The other thing is that I never felt comfortable in the movie business to begin with, yet I still did it.
Is it a case where you didn't investigate before
That's
you
exactly
invested?
Right.
Okay.
I let my partner do the investigation, and all he was investigating was how short their skirts were. But you know, I was younger. I'm not blaming it on being young and naive, but I was young and naive, you know. And quite frankly, in the movie business, it's not such a bad business to have good-looking girls all around you. That's not the worst thing that ever happened. I remember Linda, my wife, coming in the office, and we had offices in Century City and swanky. We had a viewing room with state-of-the-art cameras to view clips, and it was unbelievable. And she came in one day. Now, my wife was a kindergarten teacher at the time. She comes in, da-da-da-da-da-da, like Alice in Wonderland, and she's looking for people, and she says, she's in my office, and I have this big, huge corner triangle office overlooking Century City, and she says, you know, Dan, why is it I never see anybody, never hear typewriters? Why is it, I mean, and it was a good question, and I mean, why, you have a lot of people here, but I never see anybody other than drinking coffee. And because they're always, you know, fantasizing a script, supposedly. And it's to show you, Dick Martin was the producer of all the Beatles specials, a guy named Dick Martin. I hired him. Well, I didn't hire him. One of the guys who worked for me hired him. We're sitting at the Aladdin Hotel when I rented the whole Aladdin Hotel at $250,000 a day. And we're sitting in a big conference room talking about why we're losing our ass, hand over fist, hour by hour. And I said, Dick, well, when you manage these big deals for the Beatles, I mean, what did you do there? And he looks at me and says, what are you talking about? I'm Dick Martin, Dean Martin's son. That Dick Martin's another Dick Martin. I go, that's when I closed it up. That's when I closed it up. That was the end of my entertainment career. That microsecond. Boom! That was it. I turned to Tom Jansen, who is the chief operating officer. I said, Tom, come with me. We walked out in the hall. I said, fire every goddamn person here. I don't care what it costs us. He says, Dan, because the Aladdin supposedly was run by organized crime. Dan, well, this is big trouble. I said, I don't care what it costs us. That guy is not the Beatles guy, like everybody thought. Didn't anybody even check? And they said, well, we thought. I said, we thought my ass. We're out of this business. And so I'm walking down the hall. And, of course, in the movie industry, you always have administrative assistants that look like Raquel Welch. And so they were running behind taking notes, and I said, give me the pad, and I throw it on the ground. You're fired, get out. And that was the end. But, it was the straw that broke the camel's back. I mean, I didn't investigate. I left the investigation to somebody else, and that was wrong. And the other side of it is we were making so much money, and John Ernest can relate to this because he's worked for a big company, made a lot of money. At the time, $250,000 a day, quite frankly, wasn't a lot of money to us. It just, well, we were making so much money. I mean, everything we did touched the gold, and you get Potomac fever, you get Jesus Christ syndrome, where you think everything you're going to do is going to be right. John Allen's experienced it at Leggett. You get in this euphoria that you actually think you're smarter than newspapers say. And you're not. Believe me. You know, I remember when you bought that restaurant. Remember that? And I said,
Months later, I still remember.
yeah, and I said, John Allen, why would you want to do something like that? And we're sitting and had those Italian tablecloths. And we're sitting there, and he says, Dan, isn't the food good? I said, well, the food's not even that great. I mean, what's that got to do with it? Why would you do it? I mean, we've all done things like that. When you make, you know, when you're had a lot of success, you just think it's going to carry over into whatever else you do. And so you lessen
But
your...
that's part of what got you there in the first place. If you hadn't believed
That's
you could
right.
do anything.
But that's why
then-
you have to make mistakes to get successful. I mean, and then as you grow, you bring on qualified financial people like I did with Mr. Ernest, who was a world-class, he still is a world-class finance guy. And I mean, to put boundaries around your success, so to speak. And one of the reasons when he joined Great Western was to give us a world-class financial accounting system, which he did. He knew how to do that. He could do that asleep, right? Yeah, most of the time. But I mean, you learn these things through experience. I only knew that I needed a world-class finance guy after I made a lot of mistakes in the 10 years prior. Some of you don't understand why the banks won't do your deals. So I've developed this little chart, and it varies from state to state, country to country, but in general, I think it's it holds true. Now, we're going to use for an example, you can call this idea or investment, there's 5 of them. And we're going to assume that all these investments have a potential rate of return of 30%. All of them. That's a minimum, okay? You can put 50%, 100%. You can put, John Allen put 400% over here because he doesn't deal in deals that you can't make 400 or 500% on your money in a month. I mean, so, and then we're going to have another column called risk factor. And this risk factor is based on experience, the times I've been in litigation or you've been in litigation, competition, the size of your company, the size of the deal. And we're going to list them, and this is what I call the risk-reward schematic. And the potential rate of return, if it's a 9 on a scale from 1 to 10, that would probably mean that that's got a 75 or 80% potential rate of return. And this would be like a 60, 50, 40, 45. And those are the kinds of rate of return just for this example. And on the other side, the potential risk, 1 to 10 being the highest, 8, 2, 9, 5. Obviously, the 2 is the lowest. Now, as an entrepreneur, we were probably more interested in investment number 1 that has the highest potential rate of return. As a banker or as a financial institution that is, let's call a secured lender, he is probably interested in investment number 3 because it has the least amount of risk associated with it. Now, and then there's a variation combination. In most lenders, financial institutions have a portfolio of investments. They've got some, and they're taking, I understand they're taking less risk these days than they did 10 years ago, 5 years ago. But they have a portfolio. But now that portfolio, instead of having a mixed bag that looks more like this, they have a portfolio of 3s where there's a risk 2 on a scale from 1 to 10, and yet there's still a 40%, 45% potential rate of return. And we don't understand when we take our deal that says it's got a 300% rate of return potential, and oh, by the way, but there's also a 50% chance it won't go. Why the financial institution doesn't understand. So now there's 1 or 2 things you do. and I'm not recommending the first, you lie. That's not what my recommendation is. And you dress up, so to speak, or puff up, so to speak, the rates of return, and you minimize the risk. But we all do that naturally. We all think our deals are better, and we always convince ourselves that there's not as much risk. But there are financial institutions in this world that there's a place to fund every deal in the world. And I told you earlier about the example of sending out 700 resumes as opposed to 7. There's Hong Kong, Australia, South Africa, Chile. Although the South American countries, you might have trouble. Well, a lot of the foreign countries have trouble with currency, and you got to make sure you can get your currency out. And I mean, there's a whole other myriad of obstacles or challenges, as they say. But there are places right now that, I mean, short of going to organized crime for your money, that you can find. But you have to understand who is sitting on the other side of the table and how he's looking at the deal. He's not looking at the 90 to 40% rate of return. He's only looking at this side and making sure that he can get his collateral, his security, be a secured lender, and make sure he get his money back so he keeps his job. I said something at the break earlier. Why do you think 70% of financial transactions that happen in a year happen in the last 60 to 90 days of a year? That's part of it, but part of it also, and this is one man's opinion, not everybody agrees with this, but I've always found it easier to do deals at the year end because most people are on a bonus system and their bonuses are paid on the year end, and they are more likely to allow a transaction to go through, not saying they're doing less due diligence, but because it's at the year end. The hardest time of the year to get a deal done is at the beginning of the year. Nobody's got any incentive. January, February, March, April. First of all, March, April, it's tax time. So January and February, nobody's got any incentive to do anything. Of all the deals that Great Western did that I can remember, we only did one deal that closed in February. And all the other deals, and we did a lot of deals, they all closed at the end of the year. One, there's no incentive. I mean, bonus structures at banks are normally based on year-end calculations. So there's a whole series of reasons why you should wait to the end of the year. The end of the year is starting in late summer and working so you have enough time to close the deal. But remember that this is the way a financial institution is going to look at your transaction. He's not going to look at the rate of return potential that Chalk's going to try to sell him. He's going to look at how much risk is associated. In this $50 million deal, that's exactly what they're going to look at. The risk associated, and that they can't secure collateral because it's often, where the hell is it? Kazakhstan. We'll get the money though. I got an idea, but anyway, I got an idea. But yeah, I know, John Allen. I know. But I mean, so think about this before you get down and you're sitting down with whoever you're going to try to get money out of. Think about how he's going to think about it. What do we talk about before you simulate? You practice. You know? Now, when you had professional finance guys, I mean, this is ingrained. They already know what the banker thinks like. They already know how they think because they've been doing it 15, 25, 30 years. Now, you, with one exception in here, I don't think that are in that position, other than Mr. Ernest. You guys and gals aren't in that position. I mean, whereas he knows how they think and he knows how to kind of, I won't say dress it up, but make it look like they want it, and with the kinds of collateralization and the kinds of things that you can get away with when you're a bigger company and you've got sophisticated finance people putting these documents together. But for the most part, people that attend these aren't in that category. But just think of that. So when you're structuring your presentation, think about how he's going to think about it. And then be positive, be aggressive, assume it's going to get done. And as Burl said, I mean, it does get done. Okay. That was, we had that handout. Oh, okay. We have the overhead now, so we don't have the handout. I stand corrected. Okay. Okay. Okay, we're going to take a short break. The nurturing period, it's like building a business at any stage, and what we unfortunately have a tendency to do if we've been in business 10 or 20 or 30 years, we stop building. We stop, our priorities change, our kids grow up, whatever. But businesses are going two ways. You're either going this way or you're going this way. You're either accelerating at an accelerating pace or you're accelerating at a decelerating pace. And if you're accelerating at a decelerating pace, you're really going like this. So financing becomes a problem, a challenge to all businesses, be it a practice of law. I happen to know that my law firm in Houston has now for those of you that practice the law, as opposed to being lawyers, practice the law, they have a 94% collection rate. They collect within 45 to 60 days, 94% of all billings. I think I'm saying that right, which I think is pretty high. In fact, I think it's damn high. In fact, I think it's the highest in the country. I don't think it, I know, because Steve Sussman tells me so. But Steve, to his credit, in addition to being a brilliant trial lawyer, that's why he represents me, one of probably the best lawyers, and arguably the best trial lawyer in the country, he has run his law firm like a business. And he's built it like a business, and businesses operate off cash flow. And as far as he's concerned, that's what it's all about. Now, all businesses need finance at one time or another in the growth process. But this is an important concept when you get started, and it's one of my Peñaisms. You cannot win at poker with a scared money. It gives off a stench that is repugnant to the winning hand. If you're going to play poker, leave your money at home and play with other people's money. And I don't mean play in the sense of like it's a game, but I mean use OPM. Because the first leverage, the biggest leverage item you have in your life is other people. To successfully lead other people, train other people, coach other people to do your companies or your bidding. The second biggest asset you have is OPM, other people's money, i.e. joint ventures, instant track record with Leggett, John Allen Chalk, for an example. Instant track record with the Defense Fuel Center, which is the federal government. Instant track record, other people's money, the New York Stock Exchange member firm that sold our tax shelters. Instant track record with the joint ventures that we did with Texaco, the Japanese National Oil Company, the Israeli government, Chevron. That's their money. Okay. Now when you get started and you want to finance these things, once you get over the pride of ownership, which is a big thing, it's my idea, how can I give it up? Once you've gotten over that hurdle, that obstacle, then the next, not obstacle, but challenge is you will grow geometrically by definition if you're not using your money. Let me give you a simple example. We're going to do a $50,000 deal. I'm going to do it myself. I put up 50 grand. We are anticipating a growth rate of 25% per annum. Now, instead of me just doing the $50,000 on my own, I go to John Allen. I say, John Allen, we're each going to pony up $25,000. Okay. Now, forgetting the fact that I'm diversifying my risk into more than one deal, now I'm able to do a second deal. I take my $25,000 and I go to Marcia and we do another joint venture. Now I'm exposed to two arenas of potential profit. I'm exposed to the opportunity of doing and growing in two different areas. And you do it again and again and again and again. And it can be a 10% partner, it can be a 90% partner. The Kuwaiti government currently owns 32% of Great Western Resources shares. At a point in time, they had put up 78% of the money and they had 14% of the vote, which tonight when we have a few drinks was one of my greatest coups that makes the $10,000, $50,000 or $60,000 option into $50 million look like peanuts. But the point is, I enlisted the monies of other people. That's why you go public. That's what being a public entity is all about. You're using other people's money to grow. Now, obviously, the more money from somebody else you get, the more your ownership and equity is shrunk. But if I hadn't raised all the money that I did, when I owned 15% of a company that was worth $425 million, so what if I had owned 100% of a company that was worth $10 million? How am I better off? Where am I better off? I'm obviously better off with 15% of a $425 million company than I am with 100% of a $10 or a $15 million company. And it's a concept, and there's somebody in this room that understands this. Not somebody. There's a lot of people in this room that understand it intellectually, but it's emotionally having to give up equity for growth. And it gets back to that pride of authorship, that pride of ownership. It's very difficult. And I told you I've seen more deals die. But in addition to that, when you're dealing with your own money and it's all your little nest egg and you've got it all in one little deal, and I shake hands with you and your hands are sweating. You give a firm handshake. And there's water in my hand, and the water didn't come from me. My hands have never sweated in any deal. I tell the story, the first deal I did, the first big bank I had was Mid-Atlantic Bank out of New Jersey. And a guy named Frank Van Grauski, who ultimately became, I think, president, we're doing a deal, and we're getting a line of credit to do drilling. I think it was for $3 or $4 million. And as he's signing the paper, he's signing over mine, and he's smearing my name. I said, Frank, what's wrong? He said, my hands are sweating. And I go, why? He says, because you make me nervous. And he said, well, why are you doing the deal then? He says, because it's a good deal, Dan, but you make bankers nervous. Just by definition, you make bankers nervous. And it wasn't his money. But I was going to another source because I didn't have the money. But even though I didn't have the money, I dealt and negotiated like Burl did as if I did have the money. Because too many times we see individuals, you've been in a deal where the guy looks nervous. Auntie's been in a lot of deals, conversations with me in meetings where the guy's obviously nervous. He's run out of money. He knows it. I know it. He knows I know it. And he knows that I know that he knows it. I know it. Okay? And all the puffery and bullshit, you still know. And it's tough to, and it's not so I'm so smart, but I've been through so many transactions, and I've been lied to so many times and bullshitted so many times by some of the best guys in the country. I just know. I walk away with a meeting with Auntie, and I said, what'd you think? And he says, the guy's scared. And then he'll tell me why he thought he was scared. And then I'll tell him, well, did you notice this? He says, no, I didn't notice that. Unless you're a professional actor like Ron Reagan, Mr. Teflon, former president, you can't help but fall into this. That's why I would suggest, and it's not because I suggest you're practicing with other people's money. Until you get it right, then you do it with your own money. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, number one, it gives you more leverage for growth. And number two, it gives you that multiple of deals to hit that home run. And we're going to talk about hitting home runs and grand slams and positioning yourself in the next couple hours. But number three, it also doesn't put you in a position where you're negotiating from strength, where you look like a weak link in a deal. Now, even when I didn't have money, I never negotiated from weakness. because I always pretended that in my own mind. See, I tell people I've always been rich, even before I had money. I was rich. I have gift the gab, which is already pretty obvious. And I've always felt good about myself. I've always had high self-esteem, good self-concept, by no fault of my parents, just by luck, I guess. And so I've been able to approach situations that way, but it's going to be a learned habit. And Judy, with a few drinks, will give you some advice, talk to you about that. But she is in that business. She is in that business that, about dealing with self-esteem or the lack thereof, and the lack of self-concept, the high self-concept. But let me tell you, if you want to be super successful, or you want to be successful, I can assure you, the guys that are successful today, the names that I keep on bantying around, I mean, these guys are self-confident. They started with other people's money, and they learned to put themselves in a position, because the more of other people's money you use, the more deals you can do, and the more deals you can do, the higher the probability that you're going to hit a home run. Auntie? If I had really thought about it when I was writing this manual, I would have written it in the module sense instead of, it's in a time sequence. It starts in 1982 and it ends in 1992. So the reason why I flip back and forth and I have all these little tabs that I think are so smart is because the manual was written one way, and I think it's more effective for the reader to read it from the beginning to the end. But the way the course, this focus group course, is taught is not that way. So if you wonder why I'm flipping back and forth and I have all these tabs, that's the reason. Now, I talked earlier about knowing when to fold them, when to hold them, and when to bluff them. Now, this is another difficult concept to learn or to understand, because we are taught from childhood, you tell the truth, you don't lie, you do this, you do that. I mean, Christian Judaic work ethic, hard work pays off, loyalty, and all those things. That's what we're taught. And for the most part, that's true. But when you're negotiating a business deal, truth, justice, and the American way don't necessarily mean the same thing. And if Bob and I are hammering it out, tooth and nail, he, of course, wouldn't, but I might puff my side of the deal a little. No, John Allen, I know. No. They don't do that in West Texas. They wouldn't puff the deal. might make my deal sound a little better and a little richer than maybe it really is. And my son Dan would say, "You mean you're trying to rip them off, Dad?" No, son, that's not it. Because, at the end of the day, most deals are a win-win, because they think they won and you think you won. And that's the way it has to be. But when you negotiate a deal, some deals are better to walk away. Some deals it's better to stay and play your cards. And some deals you got to know when to hold and not do anything. And that's a learning process that you learn. Burl handles banks and the competition different today than she did 90 days ago. There's no question. And when I go up there to do that seminar for her and her friends, and I spent a couple days with her around the clock, she's going to even be in a different place dealing with these people. She will have an unfair advantage, because I'm going to try to pour into her head and her husband's head as much of the 22 years of knowledge as I have in dealing with people, banks, as the ads say about the seminar, I'm fresh from battle. I've been recruited, I've recruited. I've been in South America, the Far East, the Middle East, Australia, Mexico, South Africa, and done deals. I'm familiar with merchant banks, investment banks, various kinds of law, English law, Roman law. And that can't help but benefit her when I'm up there. And right now you're benefiting from it now. it's a learned process. And too many times when you get to be in your first heavy negotiation, your first entrepreneurial experience, you rely on the fact that your deal is a good deal, so you're going to stick to your guns. Most times, in the beginning, it's better to do the transaction even if you don't make any money. And I give you a point. I've given you one. I'm going to give you it again. I did $50 million in revenue my first year in business. That's all anybody ever remembers. When I was written up on the front page of the LA Times, August 1983, they only remember $50 million. Most people think that was my net worth in 1983. And remember that article when they came to Leggett? And you said, well, welcome my minority friends. Did something like that. And this was an article about rich Hispanics, and I purportedly was the richest Hispanic in the country in 1983. Wasn't true, but they thought I was. And but they only remember the 50 million. Nobody knows or remembers that I only made $90,000 on that 50 million. But I did that 50 million because I wanted to be able to put 50 million worth of float through the bank. And then that bank, I owned that bank. I owned him. Lock, stock, and barrel. I own him today. He's the president of a much bigger bank. But they only remember the 50. So I would submit to you that it's more important to do transactions and don't be as concerned, as I said earlier, with making money, but sometimes you have to walk away. And sometimes you have to walk away, and that's a learned experience. And the way you learn it is by making mistakes. And I've done deals, and John Ernest, who had to leave, he just stopped by to say hello. He said, Dan, that seminar, not 10 days, could be 20 days on the mistakes I've made. It was just 10 days with the mistakes I made with him while he was my CFO. And but I made a lot of them. But at the end of the day, see, and when you overcome that phobia, if that's the right word, for making errors, you'll learn that at the end of the day, it's the successful things that you're remembered for. It's the $50 million that I'm remembered for. Very few people remember the bad drilling fund that I had in 1984. Hardly anybody. I don't think anybody even knows about it. Very few people realize that the acquisition that I might have made that didn't work out, they don't remember those things. They remember the successes. So if they remember the successes, ladies and gentlemen, I would ask you, why should you remember anything other than the successes? Okay. Okay. Revenue. Now, revenue, as I've already mentioned this morning, is like success. You can't have too much. Now, I want to spend some time on talking about it versus cost control. I mean, in a fair amount of depth. Now, how many would say that? Well, how many of you have been in business less than 5 years at whatever you're doing? Okay, less than 10 years. Less than 15. Less than 20. Less than 25. Doc, come on, put your hand down. Less than 30. Okay. Okay. Now, so we've got 10 to 15 years is kind of a group. It's kind of like a bell curve, really. Now, I'm sure that most of you that have come out of big corporations, and even big law firms now, because they're very cost control conscious. I mean, when you do something on the Xerox machine, you got to punch in the account numbers for your account, and when you make phone calls, and when I'm up at Sussman Godfrey all day, day after day, I mean, I got this special code that's about 19 numbers long. That's me. I got to do these 19 numbers to make a phone call, and because they're conscious of costs. But one of the reasons that the Sussman Godfrey, as an example, and this is an industry I don't know much about, is so successful is because they generate so much revenue. The most important thing on Steve Sussman's mind is revenue. It's not cost control. Otherwise, he'd make all the partners flight coach. And I can assure you they don't. It's revenue. Steve Sussman in the law firm of Sussman Godfrey positions itself to get involved in the biggest plaintiff litigation cases in the country so they can generate massive amounts of revenue through contingency fees. When you start your business, since you're starting from ground zero, the most important thing to you should be the generation of revenue. And as your business grows, and as I answered earlier, it's only after your business is established. When I was generating $50 million in business my first year, I assure you I had no concept of cost control. I spent whatever money it took to get the business. I flew back and forth from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. more times than I can remember. Back and forth and back and forth. I was the first, I believe, million-mile man on American Airlines in the, Club, which I have a million-mile card now. I didn't worry about how much money it cost because I knew no expense was too low if I failed. And any expense I had wasn't high if I was successful. It's about this deal that John Allen's talking about. I can just imagine how many times he's been back and forth to Russia. I just know. And so when you're weighing how much you should spend, or perhaps the fee from the accountant's too high, or perhaps the fee from the lawyer's too high, don't measure it against the little, for services rendered, 2 hours this, 8 hours this. Don't measure it against that. Measure it against the long picture. Measure it against what you ultimately are trying to position yourself for. But instead, we're trained, we're conditioned to measure it against, well, why would anybody be worth $325 an hour? That's why lawyers love me. I mean, I'm a perfect, because I measure it against the long picture. I don't bust their chops, but they better be right, they better win, and they better be good. Otherwise, or they better have good malpractice insurance. Because, I've taken on a lot of law firms too. So, but I don't measure against that. I didn't measure against when I've hired architects or contractors or things. I measure against the long picture. If they're doing the job for me in 6 months when it should be a 3-year job, I don't measure the fact that I paid 150% of what I should have. So keep that in mind when you're trying to generate revenue. And the most important thing to you, as some of you that are neophytes in business, is the generation of revenue so you can show a track record to a bank. Okay. Yes, sir. Mike, please.
When we had the big oil bust, that came because the oil companies was living too high on the hog. If they hadn't been living too high on the hog, there might not have been the bust that we had. It wouldn't have been as severe. But some of the old oil men in West Texas was saying we got by on $10 a barrel, we're going to have to learn how to do that again. But they were definitely living too high on the hog. They wasn't watching those expenses. Yeah. Revenue can cover up more sins than anything else. No question.
What can?
Revenue.
No, absolutely.
It can absolutely do it, but then it's not going to always just go.
No, but we're talking about companies that are getting started. We're talking about companies that are getting started. We're not talking about mature companies that have been there 55 years. I mean, as I made mention specifically when Mr. Ernest was here, then I brought in somebody to put confines and to give me financial controls when I had made the company big. But when I was starting out, I wasn't interested in that. Okay? And there's a big difference, and he's got a very valid point. I mean, the reason that independents like Great Western Resources compete with the majors is because our overhead structure didn't look like theirs. We could go in and lift hydrocarbons much cheaper because we didn't have 55,000 employees, of which 30,000 were in the corporate headquarters. That's not what I'm referring to. What I'm referring to is when you get started, the most important thing is revenue. I mean, and then the next most important thing is cash flow, which is different than revenue. And the last, and I didn't, important thing, and that's not good English, is income, First before taxes and after taxes. But anybody that's been in business for himself knows with cash flow they live and die. I mean, I don't know many guys that run businesses that aren't public that give a damn if they make any money, as long as they have cash flow. I mean, unless you're getting ready to puff up the business to sell it, then all of a sudden your cost control and your expenses change, and then all of a sudden that changes. Oh, see, so I'm talking about people that are starting. Once you become a established, mature business, then you bring in people. You don't do it yourself. You don't choke it. I keep looking at Burl whenever I say choke a business. She's the professional strangler of businesses. I mean, she'd get in there, get it in the headlock, and choke it. Didn't let it breathe. Yank it around, choke it, so that's what I'm talking about. But you're absolutely correct, and I've heard that. And but mature businesses are different. Not many people in this room, if anybody, are running mature businesses that have been around 50, 60 years, that have 25,000 employees. I mean, that's not what this seminar is all about. Okay, now, and he said that all managerial performance sins shall be always forgiven during periods of rapidly increasing revenue streams. That should have in parentheses when you're starting out your business. Okay. Now, let's look at it this way. You're not supposed to be concerned about what happens in the middle of a jump. You're supposed to be thinking about where you're going to land. They're not called broad jumpers anymore. They're called long jumpers. Long jump, when the guy hits the board or the lady hits the board and she's trying to go out 22 or 24, or he's trying to go out 30 feet. What's he focusing on? Is he focusing on where he's going to land? Where he's going to be? He's not focusing in the middle of the jump. What we get bogged down into in the decision-making process and running our businesses is we focus on the flying through the air. I don't focus on that. Just as I don't hear no, I focus on where I want to be. That's why if I made any mistakes, I should have set my goals higher when I founded Great Western. That's why I've set my goals real high for this industry. And when we raise our children, we're more inclined to say, Johnny, I'd like you to be a doctor. Not, Johnny, every semester I want you to get an A in English, an A in geometry, an A in chemistry, because you need chemistry to be a doctor, an A in physics. Of course, I want you to be an All-American football player. We say, for those that I know that have parents of kids that have ultimately gone to medical school, we set in their mind, I want Johnny to come up with the idea that he wants to be a doctor. So what do? They send them to the things along the ideas of John Allen Chalk. I want my kids to go to military academies. Both of my kids have been to the NASA space camp. One wants to be a physicist and an astronaut, and the other one still wants to be a veterinarian. But they're going to go to the NASA space camp again, and they're going to keep going, and they've got a junior program that you can send kids to the Air Force Academy. They're going to go. They're going to like that idea. I got pictures of me in my uniform all over the house. I've got memorabilia from my military career because it's important for me. I personally think the military academies are some of the best education you can get in this country. And I'm going to do everything humanly possible without telling them you have to go to the Air Force Academy. You have to go to Annapolis. Well, it's the same. I'm focusing on the end. By definition, they already know. They're smart enough, just as you're smart enough to know that there's a lot of things that have to happen. And in business, we focus on the little things that have to happen instead of the big picture. Another way of putting it is, to be successful in an exponential way, you have to be macro-oriented, not micro. I already told you, when I was detail-orientated, even though I made a lot of money on Wall Street and I was very successful, I didn't really take that quantum leap until I changed to its generic. And one of the problems I'm having, well, again, this thing with my lawsuit is that I wasn't a detail-oriented person. I'm not. Wasn't then, never will be again. And now, I'm being chastised for it. But it's focusing on the end. When John Allen and I did a lot of business, John Allen focused, see, he's talking about the $50 million. He hasn't told me about all the challenges, because I've already thought about 50, that to get that, when the physical equipment's going to be in a country that's been around about 3 years, and the banks are going to want security, so how do they claim security if they default and get the crap back? That's a big challenge. See, all John Allen focused on, and he was right, the opportunity of doing a $50 million. Well, I jacked him up from $35 to $50 million. The opportunity. And that's how I would suggest that you think. The opportunity. And not all the steps that you have to take in between, because there's a lot of them. And there's a lot more of them than you can imagine. And Casey has stumbled across, over, around, under, a lot of things that he didn't envision that he was going to have to face. Okay, but focusing on the end product. The end product is what's important. Now we're going to talk about how you get people at banks, merchant banks, investment banks to do your bidding. How do you get them to do what you want to do instead of what they want to do? Now, a necessary evil, in my judgment, outside advisors. In order to really succeed in business, you need outside advisors. These advisors must be trusted advisors. To have trusted advisors, you need a very special relationship with someone at the firm. You need a mole. A perfect mole is someone who is motivated, aggressive, and ambitious, but not as bright as he or she thinks. And I don't mean this in a way that you're doing any, they call them backhands in the United Kingdom, paying anybody or anything like that. I mean, I've created more partners at major law firms. I've created more partners at major accounting firms. I've created more managing directors, CEOs. I've made more people rich in the consultancy business than anybody I know. I don't argue about fees. I pretend to argue. I let them beat me up a little and I roll over like a big canary. And those are my moles. I have people that I've done business with from Wall Street to London to Hong Kong to Australia that I have helped in their career in a professional way. When they change firms, I change with them, assuming the firm is bigger, more prestigious, and it's not a lateral or a downward change. When dealing with the opinionated and or egotistical, always give credit where it is not due. That's the hardest part for me to do. I know it works because I've done it. But I've made a lot of, one of the partners of Coopers & Lybrand, who John Allen might remember, a woman from Fort Worth, got promoted to partnership 3 years ahead of her, the curve, or whatever they call it, the zone. We dealt with the most prestigious, or one of the most prestigious law firms in England called Freshfields. When we went public, and when Tim Retallick, the senior managing partner, they used to say, they give you a lecture when you go to be one of their clients, and we had to be interviewed, and we had to have recommendations and all this baloney. And he says, we represent, if there ever becomes a conflict between the Queen and yourself, or the Bank of England and yourself, we will have to resign you as a client. Now, how there could ever be a conflict between the Queen of England and me, or the Bank of England, which is their Federal Reserve, and me, is beyond my comprehension, but that's the lecture they give. So what I did is I used to go around, which is true. Freshfield's been around since 1655 or whatever. They represent the Queen, the Bank of England, and Great Western Resources. Now, what's the perception there? The perception is we've been in business since 1867. I mean, Freshfields has been representing the Queen of England and the Bank of England for 200-300 years. So it immediately gave us instant credibility. But getting back to our moles, find somebody that's young, aggressive, probably just below partnership level, and give them a lot of business, legitimate business. And make sure when he becomes a partner, or she becomes a partner, that they remember how they got there. Don't ever let them forget. Never. Send them Christmas cards. Do whatever. And you'll get deals done in a professional way much easier, because you don't want to keep changing professionals. Because once you've got them locked into your system, it's like a computer. You just reprogram, and they spit them out. That's one of the reasons we were able to do so many deals so quickly, is because we had the same team do them over and over and over. And of course, there's a comfort level, because they feel comfortable because, one, you've done legitimate deals, you've got a track record of deals, you paid them a ton of money. I used to, the former managing director of Brown Shipley's CEO was John Van Cuffler, who John Allen knows, who I helped orchestrate how he got to be CEO. He followed my model, and he chopped the head off of the old CEO. And with a little help from me, because I was his biggest client. We represented 40% of the fees for corporate finance that year. I was a big client. I wanted John to be CEO. Now, John still remembers that. He is now CEO of the largest financial institution outside the City of London, which we may have to talk to. I made a lot of other people managing directors and partners in a lot of firms. And we did a lot of deals, made a lot of money. We all made a lot of money. But for that kind of growth, I mean, and I don't mean it in a derogatory way, you want them to be smart, but you like to let them think they're smarter than they really are. And I mean that in a positive sense, not a negative sense. And it works. It works. Sussman thinks I don't have to let him know that he's smart. I mean, he already thinks, so I don't have much problem with him. I have no problem with him. I mean, now let's talk about praise. This is something I've learned in recent years, and it's important. And I've only developed this recently, and I didn't really develop this as a younger man, and I should have. But I mean, I made a lot of mistakes. And you catch your people doing something right and give them unlimited earned praise. That was difficult for me, but it works. I'm better at it now than I used to be. And perhaps the finest gift you can give another person is that praise. And by the way, constructive criticism is not. There is no such thing in my judgment as constructive criticism, because criticism is a search for hidden beauty. And as we talked about how Napoleon Hill got people to understand what they were doing wrong through questioning. Catch them doing something right and give them unlimited praise. And people that are going to work for you are going to make mistakes. I've told Auntie, he's been with me 6 months, seems like 6 years, doesn't it? And I allow him to do a lot of things, and he's a young guy. He's just turned 22. And Leanne does a lot of things that probably she wouldn't do if she wasn't working for somebody else, one of which she has a power of attorney. She's transferred millions of dollars out of my personal accounts. I don't write checks. I just wrote my first 3 checks in 10 years. I got all excited. She was on vacation because I don't have a checkbook. I just don't. And Valerie also has power of attorney for some of my accounts, and she's transferred millions of dollars. And my business manager, Linda Pryor, also. And I just don't write checks. And so they've done all this, and so I don't know where my money is, and because that's not important to me. What's important to me is making the goddamn money, not keeping track of it. And when we were in our recent depositions, I don't think anybody believed that I don't write checks. I don't know where my money is. We found $77,000 in an account I didn't even know existed. I'm not saying that to be braggadocious about $77,000, but that's not what I focus on. I focus on making it. And I let other people keep track of it. My wife doesn't keep track of it too well either. My wife focuses on spending it. And she's world class. She is world class at that. I asked her, is that a new outfit? She goes, no. To my wife, new means that you buy it yesterday. And I said, well, where'd you get it? And she said, I got it in Amsterdam. When was the last time we were in Amsterdam? I don't remember you ever wearing it. She said, I never have. Well, we were in Amsterdam 3 years ago. Well, that's when I bought it. And then she'll come out with something else, and 5 or 6 days in a row, we used to go out 5 or 6 days in a row to fancy things. 5 or 6 days in a row, I never saw that. Is it new? They're always not new, because new is the day before. I mean, well, where'd you buy it? Well, I bought it in Paris. And I think, let's see, I took her on her 42nd birthday to Paris. She's now 44. That's 2 years ago, Linda. She says, yeah, but it's not new. And it's not new. And I said, well, but you never wore it. I said, and so now I don't ask that question. I said, have you ever worn it? That means it's new. See, I know now. I don't ask, is it new? Because to Linda, it's not new, because if it's been sitting in the closet for 2 or 3 years. But I don't focus on where the money is. I focus on how to make it. And Leanne, and I have other people do that. And I very seldom ask those kinds of questions. Now, and I'm not suggesting that you can do that at the beginning of your business. That would be giving you bad information. But ultimately, as a goal, I would set for yourselves, I want to be in a position in no time frame, and we're going to get to goal setting in a little while, where I just focus on the money I've made, not where it is. One of the things that we found out is that I have 7 offshore bank accounts, which is all part of the discovery, which I'm not giving anybody any information, which I didn't know I had 7. I mean, I just didn't. And I'll ask Leanne, who has power of attorney? Who can write a check in this account? She says, well, I think Linda Pryor and me. And well, I need some money to go over here. Well, she says, well, we got to get that from Val to go to here, and I just don't focus on it. And I think that really personifies what I'm talking about. And when it became time in the growth cycle of Great Western, I brought in a world-class finance guy, John Ernest, to talk about just what we were talking about. The oil companies got too top-heavy and made the oil bust last longer than it should have. John Ernest was controller worldwide for Gulf Oil. When it was acquired by Chevron, he went in as chief accounting officer for Chevron and then retired. And then he joined me and helped me. That's not true. He didn't help me. He did it all. He did the financial control system that we've been told is as good as any of the major companies. Okay. Now, this is kind of a not a summary. This is kind of a mini summary that, you know, what we've been talking about all afternoon is we're imprisoned by our own weaknesses and liberated by our strengths. What we are going to talk about now are our strengths, not our weaknesses. Just as we've talked about our successes, not our failures. And just as I would suggest, I would urge, I would demand of you to focus on the things you've done right in your lifetime, not the things you've done wrong. Not the restaurant that you bought that has Italian tablecloths. Not the movies that I've made that I didn't need to make. Not the construction business that I got my skin ripped off like a banana. Not those things that I've done wrong or you've done wrong. Focus on the things you've done right. And for those of you that have raised children or are raising children, I don't know, Bob, if you're still raising your son or not, but he looks pretty grown up to me. But when we raise kids, we're taught to focus on the positive, aren't we? Well, then why don't we do it in business? There's no good reason. And as I told you, a lot of the things, it's hot in here. Yeah, well, okay. Just as I've said, a lot of the things that worked as children we forget. We also forgot how most of us were raised, how most of us have attempted to raise our children. We focused on the positive. when Jim used to teach my sons tennis, it was tough to focus on the positive with one of my sons. Yep, and it's hard for me to focus on the positive with my kids. I'm better at helping people with their business than I am growing my own children up, and which I'm working on. That's one of my challenges in life for the next several years, is to work on that, because I'm trying to get better at that. If I get as good raising kids as I did building companies, the kids are going to be, giants in whatever they decide to do. And that's what my goal is. One of my goals. Now, we've talked about sticking to our knitting and not diversifying, and which is another way of saying sticking to your core business. But one of the things a lot of you play games with your calculators is trying to estimate the actual rate of return. And I'm here to tell you it doesn't matter. I have not asked Burl what the rate of return on her deals are. I have not asked. I'd be afraid to ask John Allen, because just to be so astronomical, it'll probably make me faint. I have not asked John Allen, but he's going to tell me before the days are, I assure you. I have not asked. Pardon? Yeah. I have not asked. People don't ask me what the rates of return were at Great Western. They focus in on, I started with 800, and at the height it was worth 400 million. And what you're going to see when you deal with other people on joint venture partners, and when you deal with bankers, and it comes back again on almost every example, they're going to focus on, did you do it or didn't you? I can't remember the last time anybody asked me a question, did I make money? When I bought Whitaker USA Oil and Gas Division, Whitaker's a big Fortune 200 company, nobody asked me, did it turn out profitable? All they knew is the company grew by 20% when we did it. Nobody to this day has asked me, was the Bow Valley acquisition for $160 million profitable? To this day, 7 years later, nobody's ever asked me that question. All they know is it took us from $80 million in assets to $280 million in assets. It took us from cash flow of X to 8X. It took us from 48 employees to 1,300 employees, or whatever it was. Remember that when you're doing your acquisitions, when you're looking at building your practice, remember that. Don't be as focused on, remember, this is in the beginning, this isn't a mature business, on the rates of return, because it's the transaction that's most important. And to succeed at anything, which you've already figured out, this is Dan Peña's philosophy, it probably doesn't apply to many else in the room. To succeed at anything, one must be focused to the exclusion of family, friends, God, and country, but not necessarily in that order. That's how I did it. I'm not suggesting that's the way you do it. I know that worked. I ate, slept, breathed, died Great Western blood. When they cut me, Great Western blood came out. But I also know Jobs, Gates, Perot, etc., 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 all the super athletes, Montana, all these guys, they live, breathe, eat, sleep what they're focused on. And there's no in-betweens. When Jack Nicklaus talks about winning 20 majors, he talks about he ate it, he slept it, he breathed it. Now, he moved his family to Florida so he could be closer, because there were more golf tournaments in Florida. So he could see some ball games, because football for his kids was played at night. Golf tournaments were played in the day. But he still, he's focused. He stayed absolutely committed. And that's the only way that I know that it's possible.